Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cheyenne Smith, and I'm the High Ability Learning Specialist here at the Nebraska Department of Education. We are here today to talk a little bit about Rule 3 revisions. I appreciate all of you who are here in person. This is also being recorded, so those of you who are not here will get this information as well. I am going to go ahead and start with our agenda for today. So first of all, thank you for joining. If you have questions, there are a lot of people here today, so please put them in the chat. I have a wonderful assistant from the NDE, Stacy Weber, is with us today. So if I miss a question, she will make sure that I answer it. So please feel free to put those questions in the chat. And if you're not watching this, or if you are and need it later, a recording of this webinar and the slides will be available on the NDE HAL webpage. Once it is recorded, uploaded, I will put a PDF of the slides as well. So you will get a copy of this presentation if you missed something, so no worries there. So today we are going to go over the statutory changes. There were some changes a couple of legislative sessions ago to the language surrounding high ability. We are also going to talk about the revisions to Rule 3. We'll break it down into section and talk more deeply about each section that has a major change. And we're also going to talk about the supports we are putting in place to help manage the transition. It is really important to note that these changes are not taking effect in this school year. So everything we talk about today, you are not responsible for in the 25-26 school year. We are looking at implementation for the first year in the 26-27 school year. So we have this entire school year to help plan and support and get you guys ready for the initial implementation. I'm going to start by talking about a brief history of high ability in Nebraska. And when I say brief, I mean brief. So in 1997, Nebraska passed legislation regarding high ability learners. And then in 1998, Rule 3 was approved and enacted. And as you can see, when I said brief, I meant it. There's a really big gap between 1998 and 2024, 2025, when the next changes were made, which was recent. So there is this large amount of time where most people's careers in Nebraska have never seen a change in Rule 3 or how HAL is run in Nebraska. And so while a lot of these changes may seem really big, a lot of it is because we've never had any kind of a change like this. And so when we're talking about those changes, just remember that idea of changing something that's been this way for a long time can be scary, but we are really here to help support that transition as we look towards what is new in Rule 3. So in the 2024 legislative session, LB 1329 contained some cleanup language, and the slides will be linked to the high ability statute if you're interested in reading the actual law. But the statutory changes came about in LB 1329, which was a bigger cleanup bill that had language from other education-related bills all into one. And so a lot of what happened in this statutory change was cleanup language. So not a huge amount of change to the high ability statute, but enough to warrant a revision to Rule 3. So the notable changes, one of the things that we changed is the definition of high ability learner. Please note that each district is open to adopting their own definition of high ability learner. You do not have to follow the state definition, but by statute, we are defining high ability learner as a student who performs or has the capacity to perform at greater levels in multiple or one or more domains of instruction. As you can see in the 1998 definition, we just took that and kind of updated it a little bit more to be more inclusive of students who maybe are from marginalized populations, underrepresented populations, who are not identified maybe with things such as performing high performance capability on a test score, things like that. And so the 2024 definition is aligned with the National Association for Gifted Children definition. We also really wanted to take out that intellectual, creative, artistic, or specific academic fields. We kind of just changed that to one or more domains of instruction so that it encompasses a wider variety of high ability so that schools have more flexibility in where they identify high ability. So again, your district may have a local definition of high ability, but this is the state statutory definition. Another one, if you are familiar with the high ability funding application that is filled out every year, it is filled out by a local system or a single school district. So I have 245 applications. Starting in the 26-27 school year, we are going to allow consortium funding. So as you can see, the law changed from local systems and added combination of school districts. So everything that a local system is eligible for, a consortium or a combination of school districts will be eligible for in terms of funding as well. And we're going to talk about all of these in depth and what that means a little bit later. If you're not familiar with the funding formula, this is something that is in the law that we cannot change. And so something that has been studied for a while is the allotment for high ability. So the state allots $2.36 million for high ability learning in Nebraska. Each district, public school district in Nebraska, is entitled to base funds, which is 0.001% of the allotment, which is about $2,300 when we calculate it. So every school district is eligible for that just by filling out your application. It is a non-competitive application. Districts are also eligible for what are called matching funds. And what that means is your high ability students who are in Advisor, our application pulls the data from Advisor of how many students are labeled high ability in your school district. And based on that 2.3 million, we come up with a per pupil amount once all of the districts have applied. And that breaks into a pro rata share of the appropriation. So if you identify students, we take up to 10% of your student membership. So if you identify over 10% of your population as high ability, we only fund up to that 10%, or however many high ability students you have, we take the lesser of the two numbers. So with the matching funds, there is a caveat. So districts who apply for matching funds must agree to put in at least 50% of the state allotment to local dollars. So if the NDE provides you $1,000 in matching funds, you have to commit $500 of local to match those funds. And so that is something that is in the law. That is our funding formula. That is not something that we control or can change because that is what's written in statute. For those of you on here who have not filled out your high ability application yet, the application window is open. On the NDE HAL website, there is a section for high ability funding application. You can go on there and it is in the new portal. The superintendent of the school district has the high ability application automatically in their portal this year, so there are no codes. And you can assign that to somebody in your district to fill out. So that is open through September 15th. So please get on. Even if you get on and only fill out the base amount, $2,300 for high ability is better than nothing. So the application really doesn't take long. And as I said, it's non-competitive. So you are guaranteed at least that base amount. So in terms of consorting, each individual district fills out an applications. We distribute the funds to the individual district, and then they provide us an accounting of how they spent those funds the previous year. With the consortium option, if a district decides to consort, it can be two or more school districts. If they decide to consort and apply together, you'll fill out one application as a consortium. And that means that your local dollars can be split between the districts and the consortium. So however many districts there are, you can split that cost. It's also calculated on the amount of students who are identified as high ability in that consortium. So if you have 10 students identified as HAL in your school and your consorting school has 50, then you have access to funding for 60 students between the two districts. And so that idea of being able to combine is really helpful. And the funds are distributed to an identified fiscal agent. So if you think about Perkins or Title Consortia, it is kind of the same. It could be possibly if your ESU is willing to host a consortium, it could be one district is designated the fiscal agent. There are going to be a lot of guidelines that come out with this, but just putting it on your radar that it is an option to apply with other school districts for your high ability funding. And the final change in the statute is the law change to say not only do districts have to identify students with high ability, but the State Board of Education will adopt consistent methods of identification for learners with high ability. And so what that means is previously we've been operating under the law that says you have to identify HALs. There have previously been no parameters. The law has not changed. You still must identify high ability learners, but the State Board of Education will adopt identification procedures via Rule 3, and we will talk more in depth about those shortly. So, as I said before, the statutory changes necessitated a revision to Rule 3. It was also overdue, but because there was a change to the law, we had to update the rule to comply with the law. So we're going to talk about what those revisions look like, what came out of those revisions. It was, you saw that legislative session was in 2024. This has been almost a 2-year process for this. I did see a question in the chat. I'll go ahead and answer that now before we get into the revisions. So the advantages to consorting could be one, if you pull money together, districts who are smaller, maybe more rural districts as well, can access hopefully more materials or services. So if you take your $2,300 and they take their $2,300 and their $2,300, all of a sudden now you have maybe enough to send students on a take them on some kind of a college visit, or maybe for college or for high school kids, or maybe you have the ability to buy a robotics kit, or maybe if enough districts can sort, you have money to part-time hire an itinerant teacher who goes to the different districts. And so pulling all that money together provides opportunities to get materials that you may not get by yourself. You can hire somebody to come in for professional learning for all the districts. Another thing that is really good about consorting is, again, you have more access to more money because there are more students in the consortium than there are in the individual districts, and therefore the matching amount becomes more. And because you can split that cost of the local dollars, you're not responsible for the full 500 if the NDE gives you 1,000. Maybe you're responsible for 100 and your 4 other consorting districts are responsible for 100. And so that ability to split costs, the ability to have access to more funds, and the ability to pull them together is the hope is that with those consortia, you're able to access more resources, more materials, more staffing for high ability. It's a good question. Okay, so some key revisions to Rule 3. Again, please hear this. These are not taking effect this school year. We are not expecting you to turn around and do this. So please hear that when I say it. They're not taking effect right now. In June, the State Board of Education adopted the revisions to Rule 3 that were proposed. As I said, this has been almost a 2-year process. Currently, those revisions are with the governor's office. They have to be signed by the Attorney General before they're made legally binding and official. So they are sitting on a desk somewhere in the Capitol waiting for that. But all indications are that once that's signed, we'll be ready to go. So it has cleared the hurdle of the state board, and we are just waiting on an official signature. So technically, the revisions are still not legally in place until that's signed. There are some things in Rule 3 that we could not change because of the law. So like I mentioned before, statutory definitions. I cannot change the high ability definition in Rule 3 because it is in the law. The funding formula, as much as it is kind of a convoluted formula and we've been using it for a while, we don't have the ability to change that in the rule because it's written in the law. And we also don't have the ability to change the requirements that are not in law. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Nebraska law requires each school district to identify high ability students. They do not require providing services by law. So we could not change that in the rule. We cannot say you now have to require services because it is not written in the law. So we're going to start with just some some things to think about. So as we were doing this rule, we wanted to be really conscientious. So the proposed revisions will not bring about unfunded mandates. Anything that we're asking you to do can be done either within your $2,300 or with your current tools. When we were writing the revisions, we had a representative writing team from across the state, from different size districts, from different positions in districts and ESUs and organizations as well. So we tried to make sure that we were representing all voices when we were revising the rule. We did considerable research, not only with best practice, but did a lot of research about other states and what's working in states that are similar to Nebraska geographically and demographically. So we did a lot of research. There were multiple feedback sessions, not only from my writing team, but we had public input period, public comment period, the ability to testify for the state board. So there was a lot of time where we took feedback and helped shape the revisions. And we know this is a big change. We're planning to provide extensive support over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, because we are not out to get you with mandates. This was not the intention when we were revising this rule, was to have another gotcha from the NDE. We are wanting to provide commitment to high ability students and to supporting all students in Nebraska versus just something else to do for compliance. So it's really important to note that this is not something that we did with the intention of creating more regulations for districts. It's something we're doing to commit ourselves to all students in Nebraska, including students with high ability. We're going to start by talking about the changes in Rule 3 regarding identification. Our goal was to improve consistency. So as I mentioned before, when the law was written and Rule 3 was written, it says you have to identify, and there was no kind of regulation to that at all. And so I have 245 different identification systems in the state. And so when I look at data for high ability in Nebraska, it's hard for me to say, this is what high ability learner in Nebraska is, or this data is any kind of consistent if we don't have any kind of consistency in our identification system. So in Rule 3, it is proposed, the proposed revision is that districts must use multiple criteria in their identification system, meaning you have to use at least 3 data points in your identification system for high ability students. One of them must come from a quantitative assessment tool. So that is your tests, norm reference tests, criterion reference tests. One has to come from a qualitative assessment tool, which are things like teacher input, parent input, scales, portfolio reviews, things like that. And then the third data point can come from either category. And all requirements can be met with your current tools. We are not asking you to go out and buy COGAT for all of your students or asking you to do any additional purchasing of identification tools. All of these can be met within your district's current tools. We also don't have a list of approved assessments. In the rule, it lists the assessment tools. So for example, under quantitative assessment, it says norm or criterion referenced assessment. So that can be MAP, FastBridge, COGAT, IQ test, any number of tests, NSCAS that your district already uses. So we didn't want to say you have to use a certain test. You get to choose your test. Summative assessment is a quantitative assessment tool. A language acquisition assessment such as ELPA or any kind of seal of biliteracy assessment, those things as well are quantitative assessment tools. Nominations can be a qualitative assessment tool, whether that's a teacher or a parent. A record of accomplishments, so maybe they're student vice president, maybe they won a poetry contest, things like that. Those are all qualitative pieces of data that we can use on students to help identify high ability that don't necessarily have to do with a test score. Observation checklist. So in the rule, it outlines these buckets of assessments and examples of what fit in those buckets. So when I say you have to use a quantitative assessment tool, it can be any of them that you use in your district. And qualitative assessment tool is anything that gives us data on a student that's not necessarily a test. So We wanted to make it very flexible in terms of local control so that you can choose what's best for your students. There are no cut scores in the rule, so we did not say you have to identify at a certain percentile. That is also a local decision. So we wanted to make sure that it was consistent and that everybody was considering multiple pieces of data without being restrictive in what we were asking you to use. Another one is portability. So if a student in Nebraska is identified as high ability in one district, if they transfer to another district, they are going to retain that high ability identification. If a district determines a student should not have that high ability identification, they are able to follow an exit procedure, which is outlined in Rule 3. And it's also something that we're going to be providing examples of and templates for. This matters because it provides continuity in services. If a student comes to us and maybe they've moved across the state or there's an emergency, a family emergency, a reason they had to move, that disruption during that transition, especially for highly mobile students, maybe we give them, one test and they don't test well that day and we're not providing services. There's no continuity in that. And so keeping that label helps them have that continuity, helps us minimize the error of assessment. And that really matters because there's an emotional piece to this as well. If a student moves into your district and, we say to them, you were smart in your last district, you're not smart in our district, that has an emotional impact. That really strikes their confidence. And so it is important to note, just because a student maintains their high ability label does not mean that you have to put them in your high ability program or high ability services. If a student moves, their ability does not change. If a student is identified in one district with dyslexia, if they move to another district, they still have dyslexia. Similar with high ability. Just because they move, their ability does not change, but their need for services may change based on their new environment. So just because they're identified as high ability, their best service placement may be in the gen ed classroom in their next district. Or, as I mentioned before, there are no services provided by law. If a student moves into your district with a high ability identification and you don't provide services or you don't provide services in the area they were identified, you just keep their identification on record, especially if there's a chance they're going to move again, and you just can only provide what your district can provide. So it's really important to note that we are moving away from this idea that the label is what's important, and it's way more important about meeting the students' needs. So giving and taking that label, it also, keeps your high ability numbers, similar, especially if you're in a smaller district and you have a student come in with high ability, things like that. So that's something that we're going to provide a lot of guidance on because we have exit procedures, parent letters, things like that. So that's going to be coming with a lot of templates. We also have some new requirements for data evaluation and planning. We actually are aiming to take some of the stress off of schools in terms of planning and evaluation for high ability. So in the 1998 version, districts are supposed to evaluate their HAL plan every year and really comprehensively evaluate it every 2 years. So you're supposed to submit a revised high ability plan every single year to the NDE as written in 1998 version of Rule 3. But that's a big undertaking to think about changing your plan or looking at your plan every year. So in Rule 3, it is now a 5-year cycle for program review. We wanted to align it maybe closer to what we do with Rule 10 accreditation cycles. So if you are, if we're getting on cycle and you're doing your Rule 10 accreditation, it's a really great time to go ahead and look at your high ability plan as well and review your program. So that takes that stress off of doing it once a year. You only have to update your HAL plan every 5 years in response to this review. We are also working on streamlining the high ability plan with things like the NEMTSS SIP template, so that if you fill out the SIP template and hit certain criteria on the SIP template, it will also count as your high ability plan. That's something that I'm working on with the NEMTSS team. And as I said before, the HAL plan revisions only have to happen every 5 years instead of every single year. And so that is something that we are really excited about, is let's be more comprehensive every 5 years instead of just glancing at it once a year. You can always tweak it from year to year, but major changes you can make between cycles, but I highly recommend staying on a 5-year cycle. And then planning and evaluation. Currently, there is not a way to disaggregate data by high ability. So if you've been on the Nebraska Education Profile, I don't even have access to this data. I can't go on and look at achievement data and sort by high ability. So we're going to be disaggregating our data by high ability. So as I mentioned, students are flagged in advisors high ability. We will be able to sort data by high ability. So we're using the data that's already collected for Rule 10, achievement and ACT, graduation rates. And then we will be asking for enrollment in advanced courses. And so that could be like me pulling AP and IB enrollment, reporting dual enrollment. So we want to be able to disaggregate our data so that we know we are looking at, when we look at high ability data, we have across the state the ability to see trends in these different categories that we haven't previously been able to see.
On some of this, I'll talk to Sonia later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I see a question in the chat, some guidance on the percentile that we should use. What about enrollment in honors courses? I would love to know enrollment in honors courses as well. Part of why we chose these is because they are reported to us via Rule 10. And so asking about enrollment in honors courses would be an additional thing that districts have to pull and report to me. I definitely would love to see that. That is something I can think about because I don't know if honors courses is in Rule 3, but for districts, especially districts, if you don't have AP and IB, I would love to look at honors enrollment. So that might be something that I would like to look at. The NEMTSS SIP data, or SIP template. So Nebraska MTSS has this fillable template. CIP is continuous improvement plan that districts can fill out. And it's a really great, like kind of one-stop, like ask for your data, ask for your interventions, gets kind of all of that information in one place so that districts can look at it, make kind of continuous improvement goals and continue to fill it out so they can see if they're meeting their goals. And so adding a line for high ability in that template is really easy for us. And it's something that would make it easier for schools to not only look at their trends, but look at streamlining again. So you don't have a separate high ability plan. We're trying to streamline everything. And so integrating into that continuous improvement template is something that we are really excited about so the districts can see that. That is a good question about disaggregating data. That is something that we really struggle with when we disaggregate because we can only, when schools report to us, they only report high ability. It's not reported in which area they qualify because we don't have statutory areas they qualify. So we are not able to necessarily pull math, English, things like that. So high ability kind of gets, it's all this one big pool of data we get. So we are not able to look at how students, what areas are their strength areas, excuse me. Okay, thinking about all the districts across the state differing in services, if they even offer services, how will the collected data be used? Something that, well, currently, like I said, I don't have access to that data. And so it's really hard to, when, the State Board of Education asks me, like, what is the achievement of our high ability students? Are they achieving at, are they scoring at the highest level on the NSCAS? Are they making growth on MAP? Are they graduating at the same rate as their non-high ability peers? And so not only do I not have the ability to defend or provide any information about the high ability population in Nebraska, We also want that data to help drive future decisions because we can see maybe gaps or we can see achievement trends or ACT trends or graduation trends. So collecting that data will allow us to see kind of this big landscape picture and help drive our improvement. Hopefully it's not another 25 years until Rule 3 is revised, right? And so maybe that's another revision to Rule 3. Maybe that's a statutory change. Maybe it's using that data to ask for more money from the legislature. So that's kind of the goal, is to collect this data so that we have information to defend and make better decisions about what we're doing. And maybe someday, like I said, maybe we'll use it to get some more support for high ability is the hope. They're all great questions. Funding. As I mentioned before, districts may apply together as consortia. So you may apply as a group of districts. You may apply through an ESU. There are some ESUs that do a similar thing where the districts individually apply and then pay into the consortium. This, if the ESU would like, we'll take out a step where they can just fill out one application and the money goes directly to the ESU as the fiscal agent. So that's kind of the hope there. And then the process for that is, like I said, identifying a fiscal agent. That fiscal agent is the one who fills out the high ability application. That's who we disperse the funds to. That's who provides us the budget report at the end of the year. Everyone in the consortium needs to sign an MOU or a letter of agreement upon what they're going to use the high ability money for. And then whichever district is the consortium lead, like I said, is required, is the one that is making sure the high ability plan is up to date and published, making sure that every, high ability students are being reported in an advisor, any data we're asking for, like if we were to reach out and ask for honors data, those kinds of things. The consortium lead is also in charge of the budget, the spending, all those different kinds of things. So the rule outlines this pretty vaguely. Guidance is going to be administered in terms of how to operationalize this. We are going to be sending out a survey, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, about what districts may be interested in consorting, so we know how many to expect and things like that. So this is still a year away because we're still in the current application cycle, but this is something to think about, maybe put on your radar. Talk to some of the schools around you if you would like, and start maybe thinking about if this is something your district would be interested in. And support to manage the transition. So there are things that we're developing at the NDE, and there are opportunities for feedback as well as to what you need, because I can put out products that I think are needed to support Rule 3, but I really need to hear from you guys what you need to support your transition with Rule 3. So in the coming week, hopefully next week, there will be a support survey coming out from the NDE. It will ask things like, what areas do you need support in? What is the best method of support? What needs to be in guidance? What professional development? Things like that, to help us better understand how we can support districts from this level. We're also going to have tools such as an alignment assessment or a Rule 3 rubric, where it lays out the requirements for the upcoming changes, and you can go through your current HAL plan or your current system and check off where if you meet requirements. We'll also be working on like policy and procedure reviews, because if you have to change any of your procedures, they might have to go through your state board or your local school board for high ability. So developing some guidance around policy and procedures. There's also anytime you reach out to the NDE, myself, support, I can support you at the individual district level as well, helping you with your high ability plan and things like that. And then some resources that are in the works that will be coming out in the coming weeks as well. If you had read Rule 3 or have read Rule 3 previously, you know it is really hard to look at a legal version of a document with the mays and shalls and musts and all the different language in there. And so the user-friendly Rule 3 is just a document that takes each section of Rule 3 and breaks it down into normal language about what is and is not required and what things actually mean in the different sections. We also have things like Rule 3 at a glance, which is just a one-pager about what's required in Rule 3. Frequently asked questions. I am constantly adding to a document of frequently asked questions. We're working on, like I said, a lot of those different alignments with NEMTSS. We'll be providing a lot of sample templates, so how plans, exit procedures, parent notification letters. This will probably not be my last webinar. As we get closer to next school year, we'll also be holding office hours for you guys to pop in and have discussions about Rule 3 as well. And then I've already talked to several ESUs to offer professional learning, go out to the ESUs, get districts together, work on Rule 3 alignment, identification, things like that. So working on a lot of things coming out in the next months. This was just approved in June, so we are working as fast as we can to get some of this information out. So be on the lookout. If you signed up for this webinar, you will also receive emails regarding all of this information. So you will be on the list for that. So I'm going to pause for questions. I'm going to leave my contact information up here as well. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I am so willing to help and to discuss things with you. So please feel free to reach out. And at this time, if you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can come off of mute and ask. Yes, so timeline. So this is not taking effect this school year. So the 26-27 school year would be our goal for being ready to implement. And we're not going to come in 26-27 and put the hammer down if you don't have your identification system fully fleshed out or things like that. As mentioned before, by law, programming is not required. Services are not required. So there is no rush per se about putting programming in place because that's something that is not required. For the 3 testing measures, so they have to be available in your grader identification system. I am not opposed if a district, has like, here's an automatic qualifier, you've scored 99.9 percentile on your MAP test, so you automatically qualify. But maybe you have a student, again, who didn't hit your threshold, so let's look at the qualitative measure, and then let's look at the third measure. So your system has to have the availability of 3 criteria to help identify students. That does not preclude having an automatic qualifier. Yes, you can definitely use a if this then that process. I encourage like kind of a flow process as well, because as mentioned previously in that question, if you have students in the 99.99 percentile, you don't need to also, use a teacher scale necessarily. So using that kind of flow method is really great. A great way to help get that. So yes, your identification system has to have 3 criteria. For those of you who are just joining, the HAL application funding the HAL funding application is open. If you Google NDE HAL, on my website, there is a section that says NDE high ability, or there's a section that says high ability application funding. If you click on that, it will take you to the new portal. It has all of the directions as well. So if you don't have access to that, somebody in your district has that. So it's the super, most likely, and they have to assign it to you. And if the super doesn't have it, it's whoever used to get the codes for the legacy portal has that application available, and then they assign it to whoever they would like to fill it out. So please do that in the next 2 weeks. And if you have questions about that, please reach out as well. Thank you all so much for attending. I'm going to stay on if you guys have any questions, but I look forward to working with you all and see you in the future.